And then we can go live. So let's see. My wife was just very kind and took my dog away, so I don't have so much help.
Come on, you.
All right. Well, hello. We are getting started. This is Fisher's Historical Society. I'm Jim Morgan, and we have somebody I've been very excited about trying to get on one of our panels here. David Heighway is the Hamilton County official historian and has been for, you said, 18 years now. So, which is quite the deal. So, David, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us what a Hamilton County historian is, and then we'll kind of get into this whole thing.
All righty, thanks much. Yeah, the County Historian Program was created by the Indiana Historical Society back in 1981, and basically we're here as kind of a reference point as much as anything else. I mean, part of my job, literally, or part of it's not a paid job; it is actually an unpaid job position. But for instance, if somebody's doing development and they have to jump through all of those hoops, if you've ever read about that, they have to talk to the environmental people, they have to talk to, the drainage people, all of this kind of stuff. I'm one of the people on that list. They will send me a draft of their project and kind of say, okay, is there anything historic in this area? Is there any historic buildings? Is there possible archaeology here? I don't do the prehistoric archaeology. That's actually another person I have to contact, but I can at least give them an idea. Now, I haven't had much to do down in Fishers because it's been all cornfields. So the houses just tend to be kind of like they say, what about this field? I'm saying, cornfield, pretty much from the get-go. So not much to be told there. Once in a while, we've had to do some things like up in the northern part of the county. There were some road improvement things. But so anyway, so that is what I do. I also go out and I talk to groups like I'm doing now. I've talked to thousands of third graders over the years, Kiwanians, senior living places, different stuff like that. Just trying to get some information out, trying to tell some of the good stories and get people excited about preserving their history and about talking about their history. So that is what I do.
Well, very good. Well, I will say that Fishers, we just lost one of the things that we were all trying to protect for a long time and didn't have any luck accomplishing. And I got a chance to go through the Kincaid Flanagan house. A person from Fishers allowed us to go through it. Somebody that we did one of these with was writing her master's thesis on historic architectural preservation on that house. So we went through it, and it was very scary, because I come from a building background, and I still have no idea what was holding that first floor in place. I didn't see any place that was actually attached. Now the upstairs was in pretty good shape, but I was like telling people, do not, you saw us in it, don't go in it. It was in pretty rough shape.
Yeah, it's interesting because as well, I don't know if you know, you since you do building, you know about bricks.
Yeah.
That bricks are not as solid as sometimes people think they are. And those ancient pumpkin bricks, as I think they're called on occasion, can be really soft and powdery. And the effort to preserve a building that old, sometimes you just run into the fact that the bricks themselves are just not doing it. So it is unfortunate. I was sorry to see it go. But at the same time, now, of course, they're talking about reusing some of those bricks. And I'm just thinking, that's not what they're for. They don't recycle. But
well, I have those. Keep this between ourselves here. But I went out and picked up 3 of those bricks, and so we have one to keep for the historical society, and we also one of them maybe we'll do as a raffle sometime down the road. And then one of them, Bob Kincaid is on our historical board, and Bob grew up in that house, so I wanted to make sure he got one of bricks. So.
Absolutely necessary. So yeah, it's too bad. It's interesting how these old remnants do turn up. For instance, one of the things I heard many years ago, when they were widening 116th Street, when they were upgrading it to what it is today, basically, they got to where the railroad was, but at that point in time, of course, it was still there. They dug down through that rail bed there and found remnants of at least 2 to 3 other rail beds. And then underneath that, they found some of the old wood from the plank road that was 100.
Wow.
So it's there. There's stuff down underneath. Ironically, Fishers may preserve better than other places because, of course, it was built on a swamp. That's why they call it mudsock. I'm kind of
Right.
amazed at how many people I have to kind of clarify that too. They say, it's a cutesy name, and I'm going, no, it's what it is. It is muck underneath that thing.
Well, I remember when all of downtown would flood, so like all these little buildings and stuff would be underwater. People would take their little
Mhm.
boats to get back to their house.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get consulted by some of the modern contractors who are building, things like the boutique hotel downtown and stuff like that. And they ask me about the history, and I say, I really hope you talk to a geologist before you built the building because there is nothing underneath you. Now, I run into that elsewhere around the county. There are buildings that have been built over old mineral springs. And I'm going, guys, that is a hollow spot in a big limestone space there. So you kind of need to check on this stuff. It's kind of amazing there. So
Well, the that new nickel plate hotel that's right there by the rail trail.
mhm.
We donated a black and white picture that they have in their lobby of the Casteller grocery store that used to be on that spot. So so we did that from the historical society, and they
Yeah,
were gracious enough they wanted to have that in there, to tie it in.
yeah. Just trying to kind of establish it. Of course, now they didn't like what I told them about. I'm sure you've had somebody already talking about the Battle of Mudsock,
Oh
1881.
yeah. Hmm.
So, and I kind of pointed out that, that was where the Tavern on Poles was, that was owned by Hamp West. Just to let you know about the muck and about your history. That's yeah. When we talk about the history of Fishers, it's amazing how many people get sort of uninterested.
Well, it's like we have on our board somebody who's written a book called Wicked History, and he's got some Wicked Fishers, and he has some really good stories, and about the one of the grave robbing
Yes,
circles that was actually run by a doctor out of Fishers for a long time. So
he works with a lot of my old material. I
yeah,
pushed on that years. Well, I did a blog post on that years ago. Robert Bowling,
yeah.
and he actually first put it into a book. Now there's a new book by a guy named Chris Fluke, which goes into deeper detail about the whole grave robbing here in Fishers, which was a really really big thing. So if you ever have a chance, I recommend visiting the Indiana Medical History Museum down in Indianapolis. They've got some great material, and that's actually where some of the bodies ended up. So you've
Oh,
got
is
time.
that right?
Yes. So it is a wonderfully preserved 19th century medical laboratory.
Isn't that the old Central State?
That is exactly what it is. It
Mhm.
was it was a teaching area for Central State, and they preserved it and done a wonderful job of interpreting it. But yeah, that was where what's his name now? Oh, I'm skipping on the doctor who actually did all of that stuff. But anyway, yes, it's out there and it's some great stuff.
Well,
So
that's on my list of places to go anyway. I found out that I have a two times great grandmother that I didn't know her name until I started doing genealogy, who died at Central State just after the turn of the night, the 20th century, when it was probably at its heyday of being overcrowded and what have you. And she died of uh, pernicious, well, basically something that I think vitamin B can solve now. But and I was always wanting, I've been really wanting to go in and Dr. Wishard was the one that did her death certificate. Okay, but I wanted to find out why she was there. Okay, and then
mhm.
also um, I wonder if she even spoke English because she was German. So I really, so at that time, she could have had postpartum depression. Who knows what it was because she was only in her 40s. So
Yeah. It's actually one way that actually helps in finding that stuff out. I don't know if you've ever heard about newspapers.com.
yeah.
Okay, so you know about that. We have that available at the Hamilton Public Library.
Mhm.
And so if you ever have a desire to go search for that, you can come to the library and we can certainly do some work on that. So,
Excellent. Well, you said that you're working on a project right now on transportation in Hamilton County, and I want to let you kind of roll with that. I don't want to keep
okay.
distracting you here with stories because I could do this all night. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
Actually, I've got a PowerPoint.
Oh, go for it. Well, on the bottom, there's a little green button that says share.
There we go. Okay, let's do that. Um, okay. Can you see that?
It's coming up. It says there you are. Fisher's as a crossroad.
Right. So let's hit, oops, slideshow. All righty. Because, yeah, when you're talking about the history of Fishers, you're essentially talking about transportation. I mean,
Right.
that's why the area really sort of exists. And there's all kinds of transportation that actually goes back to the very beginning of the county history and before. It's just, and it's something I like to emphasize with people is that towns just don't pop up. You don't just kind of say, "Oh, I'm going to do a town here." There's a reason. People have a reason, and Fishers in particular has a really, really strong reason. And when I say going back, I go way back. I always like to talk about kind of beginning with the Ice Age because, well, that's what created the ground that we see today. The draining of the glaciers created White River. I like to include the skeleton there because I actually found one of those, believe it or not, on Courthouse Square in 1884
In Noblesville?
in Noblesville. So, but I know they found a couple of mammoth teeth down in, I think, Fall Creek Township, and there's been some Ice Age artifacts, but that's really kind of when it started, because what it was is that it was all animal trails. It was game trails. These were kind of some of the first things that kind of appeared that really influenced how animals and people eventually all traveled along the way there. The animal trails were actually made mostly by elk. Down in the southern part of the state, they have the buffalo trace. And the buffalo, though, were more actually to the west because that's prairie. Buffalo are more of a prairie animal, but the elk were the forest animal, and they were the ones that kind of created the trails here. And there were a couple of key trails that we look at. One goes north-south. It actually starts around the Falls of the Ohio, down around Clarksville, and then travels up through several counties, what were today counties, up to what Fort Wayne is today, the meeting of the three rivers, Kikianga. So that was one of the trails. The other one is one actually has a name. It's called Lafayette Trace. Started down around Cincinnati, up the Whitewater Valley, went through Newcastle, Anderson, crossed up here in northern Hamilton County, and then all the way up to the Wabash River, what today is actually Prophetstown. It was in use for a long, long time. So those two trails that really influenced all of the human movement in the area. That's where they came
It
in.
look it looks like 69 and 74 to me.
Boom. That is an excellent comparison. That is an excellent comparison. And we'll get into that because, yeah, there are paths that we don't have an official term in history for them, but they echo. The routes echo through centuries. And people will say, "Oh, we've got this brand new highway from here to here." And I'm going, "No, that's been there for 400 years." Actually, people for a long time referred to a couple of these routes as the William Connor Trail. You might have seen that if you ever were at Connor Prairie or something.
No, sure.
And but the thing is that really the Connor Trail is just these lines. These were around centuries before Connor even showed his face. And so as a result, I have to clarify and say, well, he was one of the first Europeans to actually come into the area, and he actually had to do a little tree cutting to get through. But no, both the wild animals and the Native Americans, that's why we have mounds up at Strawtown, all use this area. Connor got in 1802. There was actually military activity on here during the War of 1812. There was a troop of soldiers came up in 1813 up along up along the red path there. What's the red path in the picture? And pardon me, they were the ones. They actually clashed with the Native Americans in Strawtown. It was called the Bartholomew Expedition, and they were not terribly successful. They were not great soldiers, but nevertheless, we did have that kind of activity there. There's even a thought that William Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition might have come through this area in 1791 on a trip actually heading up to the Wabash River on a during the 1790s. What do they call it? Basically, the Northwest Indian Wars. He might have been in through this area, but of course nobody had surveyed the area. We have no real clue as to where these people went. So moving along, they eventually did survey it. This is the first map of Hamilton County from 1825, and you can see that north-south route that parallels White River. So in a sense, you're seeing that section of what comes through Delaware Township right now. And nothing is marked on there because there was nothing here, essentially. Now, as you get on, you do start to see some markings and some evidence and things like that. This is a little map that they put together at Connor Prairie. kind of showing how the county got settled. And you see 1830, it's just opening up. It was officially opened 1818, became a county 1823. 1830, you're settling along Fall Creek. They're along White River. And then you see a collection of dots to the north. That's Lafayette Trace. The thing is that you can kind of see those lines, the same lines right here. And this is a map from 1838. Actually, this one shows the attempted at a canal as well. But the thing is that when you look at this map and then compare it to 10 years later, you can see that there were huge changes. That was really one of the first big migration periods in the county there. That was one of the first major situations. You see there are actually towns that have been named and things like that. So that is kind of the start of all of this, is having those things come through there like that. Let me see where I'm at.
Are each one of those dots like a landowner?
Yes, we
Okay.
have land records going all the way back, and we can track them. We have actually a map of original purchasers, and that's available at the surveyor's website. There's some great maps at the county surveyor's website, so you can see that stuff there. We also have them, of course, at the library. So, but yeah, that is everybody who's actually purchased a piece of land. By 1840, it was sold off. Obviously, 1830, not quite so much there. So, but no.
In my parents, during the Hamilton County or Nobles Sesquicentennial, the bank found the original pen and ink drawings and pricing for my parents' house when it was built in 1871.
Mhm.
It was the my parents were the second family to be on deed or abstract, because the first family multiple generations, but they bought it from William Connor in the 1830s. The house was built in 1871. I'm assuming there must have been a log cabin somewhere or something before that,
Mhm.
but since then I think it's changed hands several times. But up until then, it was
Mhm.
just two families.
Yeah. Well, there's actually some good resources for checking on that, and I'll get to
Okay.
those in just a second here. But one of the things is that of course we're getting the things established, we're getting everything put together. But one of the big things, there's a couple things to look at in this map here. One is actually just below Noblesville. You see something called Connorstown.
Hmm.
That is never officially a city, and we'll get into why in just a minute. But you also see that red line. And by 1850, of course, they were deciding to put the railroad in. And that, of course, is kind of the key factor in putting all of this together. This is actually a sketch drawing of the railroad as it was being built. There was a gentleman down in Indianapolis named Christian Slater that was an artist who actually came and visited the railroad under construction and actually drew a sketch of it. So this is what Fishers essentially looked like in the 1840s. Is basically a lot of trees with a couple of rail lines being set down through there. So, by the way, if it looks a little odd, that's because that's called strap track or slab track. What it is that they couldn't get enough good iron to do a regular railroad track. So then instead they laid big wooden beams, basically cut trees down, built the ties, and then spiked or pegged in some big wooden beams, and then they had one small strip of metal that they would put on top of those beams, and that's what the railroad would actually run on. It's terrible stuff. You roll over it a couple times with a railroad engine, it curls up on you. You get what's called snakeheads. They punch holes in the cars. Not a good thing. So that was actually about the first 10 years of the railroad in this area here, from when it was built in 1851 up until just about the start of the Civil War. There was enough good iron, good rail, T-rail, I-rail being made in the United States that you could actually get some and do a decent railroad. So that's what you had right there. Of course, nobody really cared much because this was the kind of train you had traveling on those tracks. Not exactly what you call today high-tech stuff, but that is what people were thinking about when they first came through this area here. Okay, with the railroad, we've got the establishment of Fishers. That's really kind of, this is what makes Fishers what it is. This is why transportation is so key. And there's a couple of things that happen. This is a map, 1836. You see Connortown there again. Along that north-south route. There is the east-west one. It's not terribly clear on there, but you have that in there right there. That was a geographic or an economic center point. It was William Connor's house, of course, but there was also just economic activity around there. People could set up. Connor had his trading post. There were probably some craftsmen in the area, something like that to kind of keep things going. Actually, in 1825, there is a newspaper kind of advertorial about getting land in Hamilton County, and it talks about all the activity at Connor's house there. Now, the thing that's interesting is that this is a map from 1866. Railroad came through in 51, and all of a sudden Connorstown is not on anything important. At one point in time, it was, of course, on Allisonville Road or that north-south route. Well, the thing is, now we've got the railroad that's kind of paralleling it, but it's not there. So they've got to move over, directly over. And that's where New Britain came from, is literally is all the economic activity that was at Connor's house has now moved straight eastward to be next to the railroad line. That's the thing, is that they built this town to take advantage of the railroad line. However, there's a problem with this town in that New Britain is, even today, it's not really in the center of anything. I mean, it's on the railroad line, it's on kind of on the road there, but at the same time, it's not really in the center of anything. So what happens is that after the Civil War, 1869, there's a lot of infrastructure improvement. And one of the things that the county decides to do is build Eller Bridge, of course, which actually, I don't know, that burned down, I think, 59, 60, something like
There's
that.
still big controversy on what happened on that too, I think.
Yeah, arson or what. I'm
Yeah.
not going to get into that.
As with the Fishers and Carmel War or something. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so Eller Bridge was built. And the thing was, is that when they built the bridge, there were also locals who said, hey, all of a sudden we've got this bridge that goes straight from Clay Township and all the rest of that stuff and is heading along this route towards this railroad. Now, of course, the road was terrible at that point in time. As we say, mudsock. That's where they managed to cross the railroad. I don't know what they floated it on, but they did. And somebody said, well, let's improve the road. So in 1869, that's when they made the plank road into Fishers, which of course is made of simply splitting a tree in half, dropping the round half into the muck and leaving the flat part on top, and then maybe covering that over with a couple more things. It's horribly bumpy, but it's a heck of a lot better than being hub deep in mud. So all of a sudden you've got this bridge, you've got this good road, you've got this railroad, and good old Mr. Fisher's, Salathil, that's how I pronounce it, that may not be the right way, realized I can build a town here. And so that's what he did. And that's in 1876. It's already established because he's established it in 1872. And by 1880, you've actually got a whole community going on there. He guessed right. He said, this is going to become an economic core, and so I am going to get control of this situation. Now, unfortunately, he died only a year after he established the town, but still, it was obviously an economically important situation. So that's what it had right there. Now, it's kind of interesting because it was economically important, although it stayed largely agricultural, which, believe it or not, actually saved it in later years. Because one of the problems is, up in the northern part of the county, you have the natural gas boom. They discover natural gas. There's lots of gas. People think, oh my gosh, this is going to last forever. We're going to build factories. We're going to encourage immigration. People are going to come floating in here, and we'll have tons of stuff, and we'll be rich, and all this sort of thing. And Fishers just didn't quite get into the big field of natural gas. So as a result, they had the canning factory and a few other things like that. And they had a tile factory down there, but they didn't get that. Well, the thing was, is the gas didn't last. It was only about 10, 20 years at best. And then all of a sudden, all those northern towns just went bankrupt. Boom. Factories closed. Hamilton County lost 20% of its population between 1900 and 1930. Literally plunged by 1/5. And that most of that was in the northern part of the county because they had stuff and then they didn't. So Fishers managed to survive that. And that's why when the next big wave came, that's of course why they were kind of ripe territory. And of course, that was when the suburbs started. They started in Carmel somewhere around the 1950s. Fishers was a little off the beaten path, even though it was right on 37 there and eventually would be on 69. It still wasn't quite where people were moving to. So you didn't have all of that activity. So it stayed rural for a long, long time, as we were discussing earlier. So, but nevertheless, as you can see, it certainly picked up after a bit. Most of that was really starting in 80s, 90s kind of thing. Really in the 90s, it started to absolutely blossom there. Excuse me. Actually, speaking of transportation, one of the things, of course, that blossomed right about that time was an area to the south here. Now, this area at about 106th and Allisonville Road at one point in time was a giant farm. It was a horse breeding farm called Grasslands. And a fellow named Marcus Hare was the owner of it. And he bred racehorses, trotting horses, that sort of thing, and actually made quite a bit of money. He was quite well known. He did a lot of work down in Indianapolis, kind of traveling back and forth. It was kind of nice that he was on the railroad there. His farm was right near the railroad. So he was very, very successful as a horse breeder. Now, he died early part of the 20th century, and the Gatewood family bought all the property, and he had his own racetrack and everything there, but of course they turned it into agricultural area and used it for that up until they decided to build their own airport. Of course, Gatewood's airport eventually became Indianapolis Metropolitan Airport. So it's interesting that it went from one form of transportation, which was horses, to another form of transportation, which was airplanes. So kind of an interesting little tie-in right there.
When
So,
did that airport come in?
and I've got
I
that. Huh?
I'm thinking I remember when it was coming. I was a little kid, and my parents lived on 106th Street, and my grandparents lived on 108th, so it was kind of like right in between us, So that was I recall all the conversation and stuff going on about it at that when it first was kicking in.
Exactly, 1960s.
Yeah.
I'll have to go look it up, but yes, definitely. That's when it was first done as a kind of an airport. One of the things we're doing with this transportation history study is looking at all of the sites and all of the types of things. We're looking at, the prehistoric use of the river. We're looking at coaches and carriages, basically mail coaches from the 1820s. We're looking at toll booths, of course, railroads and urbans, all of that kind of stuff. The canals, even though they were not successful, and all the way up to not roads and airports. Trying to figure out, how people got in and out of the county. What were the ways, the key points for doing things like that. And so, as we said, it was kind of interesting earlier. We were talking about how those roads really kind of parallel each other. And it is interesting to see, for instance, that early route, there's that 1825 map again, does in fact reflect later Allisonville, later 37, actually the railroad as well, and even 69, because they all go basically right now from Indianapolis up to Fort Wayne. And there's another route that will take you south to Clarksville, to Louisville, places like that. So yeah, it's people travel over these roads, and I'm going, those people have been doing that for quite a few centuries now. You're kind of following right in the path of the old footsteps there. So
Yeah, when I was born, they cut my grandparents' farm in half to put 37 in, and then so I don't recall it before 37, and then I was 10 when they put 69 in. But when they put 37 in, I grew up always hearing new 37, and Allisonville was old 37. That was what we all, and it was that lasted for decades, within the Fishers people. So
yeah. Well, actually, it was I have to deal with that up in Noblesville as well. I live up in Noblesville. In Allisonville up to 10th Street. Well, actually, it didn't come up to 10th Street. That is an interesting situation. Excuse me, got to get another drink here. Hmm. But Allisonville used to go up to Noblesville, and then right where that railroad bridge is on the south side of Noblesville,
hmm
you would actually turn, and then a road would take you up 8th Street. That was the main route into town until 1925. It was a little bend right there, and actually the railroad crossed at grade. That was a railroad crossing there. You would actually do that until somebody got killed in the 1890s, and they said, nope, we can't do this anymore. That was called Dead Man's Corner for a while there, or Dead Man's Crossing. So they had that stuff, and then they built eventually the viaduct in the embankment there in 1925. But so yeah, at one point in time, 37 went up 8th Street in Noblesville, and then kind of arced around and went up kind of what is North Connor, or North 10th Street and some different things like that. So yeah, there've been some kind of twists as the technology, particularly for roads, is improving. I mean, when you're dealing with wagons, who cares? You know, I mean, you can run it through right through the heart of downtown. But yeah, when you get into automobiles, all of a sudden you get heavy traffic and it just doesn't work the same. Actually, they found that out in Noblesville as well, as the railroad improved, because when they originally built it, they were thinking in terms of those little railroad cars that I showed you, the little engine and things like that.
Yeah.
That's what they were thinking of. That's why it went right down the middle of 8th Street,
Yeah.
because they viewed it as a panel truck. I mean, it was kind of like you just get this little machine that kind of runs up and you just get stuff on and off the cars. And of course, after the Civil War, you got into multi-ton engines and things like that. And by the 1880s, they were complaining about having a railroad in the middle of town.
Well, I remember when it still was running through there. So yeah.
So yeah, that was kind of a interesting change. As technology changes, people look at the routes and they kind of go, maybe we need to move it away a little bit and find a less noisy, smoky place for it. And kind of the same thing happened with the roads as well. Mhm. So that is pretty much it. That was
Well,
kind of
it's very interesting. It's seeing all these things as they play out, and what they've become. And they started off as cow paths, right? So, or
Mhm.
elk paths, or whatever you want to call them. But I read a series of books. David McCullough is one of my favorite, historians, and
Mhm.
I'm not a big fan of fiction, history fiction. I'm not. That's something because I'm going. I don't really want to get something in my head that I think's real that's not. So, um, but he did a real sales pitch on a guy's that he thought was one of a great fiction historian, and it was Conrad Richter, and he wrote this series of books called The Trees, the Fields, and the Towns.
Okay.
And what McCullough was really selling on was he said that this guy did such a great, thorough job of investigating to get the language down, to get the culture down, to get the reality down. So it may be fictional characters and a fictional story, but it's going to give you a real good, clear picture of what life was. And it
Mhm.
was in Ohio, but it was the Northwest Territory, so it's Indiana, all of those states. And the trees is when they came in just in the forests, and they started cutting out, the a little patch to have their cabins and what have you. And then the fields is when they finally cut these big giant trees down and started making fields, and then they started building towns. It is such a fascinating series because it does give you that picture of what this would have been like here when it
Mhm.
was the deer and the elk paths. So um I think of my own four times great grandfather who he brought the family to Indiana in 1810 up like by Santa Claus, Indiana, and then they moved up to Daviess County and Martin County, and then
Mhm.
my two times great grandfather and grandfather moved to Delaware, which is what they called Indiana or Fishers in 1935. So it's fascinating when you start putting the stories with it, because also it becomes much more vivid.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, I try and do that as well. Now,
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Well,
although sometimes you can do interesting things with fiction. I actually did, for instance, when I was doing some work on the natural gas boom that I just told you about, and about how savagely it affected the northern part of the county. I
what
looked,
parts really got hit with that?
huh?
What parts got really hit? Well, I know of Gas City, which is
Mm.
further north. That whole city became known for gas. But yeah.
Yeah, basically it was called the Trenton Field, and it was really northeastern Indiana, Muncie, Marion, different spots like that. Kokomo had a certain amount of it, but also here in Hamilton County, it was Jackson Township.
Oh, was
Jackson,
it?
yeah, Jackson Township had the railroad, the northern part of the railroad, and then it was also in that field, and so as a result, they were just jamming wells in just about any place they could find them.
This is like Arcadia area or
Actually, all three towns: Atlanta,
oh,
Arcadia, and Cicero.
Cicero? Okay.
Interestingly, in 1900, Atlanta had 3 times the population of Carmel.
Wow.
So it was a huge thing. When the gas boom was here, it was a huge thing. And but as I say, they wasted it. They didn't know how to take care of it. They didn't have any idea about what to do with it. And eventually they just eventually literally ran out of gas. And those factories that they built that did glass, that did tin, various things like this, those they just closed up and moved out. So, and I was talking about Millersburg. Do you know where Millersburg is?
I I think I knew have known, but I don't know where it is now. I
It's
can't
about
think of it.
276th Street, along 19. It's where that new entrance to Beck Seeds is. It's between
Okay.
Arcade and Cicero. And and I said, okay, there was a proposal to build a railroad there prior to the Civil War between Cleveland and the Mississippi, between Cleveland and St. Louis. And it would have gone right through there. And so I said, okay, what if it had? What if they'd actually built it? It turns out it didn't work out. They couldn't get the funding. The engineering didn't work out, so it didn't happen. But if it had happened, that would have made that a very important railroad crossroads. That would have become a huge city in and of itself, particularly since after the Civil War, or during the Civil War, you had multiple trains going back and forth, supplying troops, connecting the industries at the Great Lakes with the Mississippi River, things like that. After the war, you had the gas boom, and it was right in the fields there. It would have been a crossroads. It would have become, just this almost Anderson type of city up until the gas boom died. And then it would become basically a toxic wasteland with people moving out, factories abandoned, population drop, all this kind of stuff. So just sort of said, yeah, these are kind of the way these things rise and fall, and that's just something that would have happened if we'd had that. So
Well, you had talked about uh, the canals. That was John Quincy Adams' time, who was the spearhead of that whole process, and then it
mm,
caught fire. But it was like it did have a huge impact on the state of Indiana
yeah.
because our Constitution was created to where you cannot have, you can't deficit spend the government. They have to have a balanced budget because the Indiana went bankrupt doing
Mm,
those canals. And so it was like, we're not going to do that again. So, yeah.
yeah, it was very poor planning.
Hmm.
What it was is the Mammoth Internal Improvement Acts of 1836, and it was not just canals, it was roads, it was all sorts of things. Actually, they preferred canals over railroads. Number one, railroad was not really high tech at that point in time. It was still kind of experimental. But more importantly, they didn't like the idea of railroads because you had to pay somebody else to ride on the rails. The early democracy, it was very, very important to have independent action. And on a canal, you could put your own boat in and go from point A to point B. The government was simply keeping the transportation system in line. You didn't have to tell anybody you were going to go on this thing. So for them, that was kind of what you wanted to do. It turned out to be impractical, of course, in the long run. As you say, state went bankrupt because of it, but still, that's what they wanted to do. And later on, they found out that railroads, despite the fact that somebody owns them and you have to pay the money, they're pretty easy to set up and they're pretty reliable once you get them going. So you had
Well,
that.
then, I know rivers were a big thing as far as travel at that time. And I know that that's one of the problems Indiana has. A lot of our rivers are not very navigable. From what I understand, they were originally going to put the state capital as Strawtown, but the White River was really not, not the thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting, and I have fun with this. Part of that's a little bit of
Oh,
mythology,
really?
but it's also based in reality because when Indianapolis when Strawtown in the 1820s, when they were forming this committee, Strawtown was a thriving community. It was a stopping point on those two trails that I was pointing out. It was actually crossroads. There was a lot of traffic going back and forth. They had a cemetery, they had a whiskey, they had a distillery, they had a horse racing track. I mean, it was a growing town. And in 1820, Strawtown was an important town. Indianapolis was just ink on a map.
And it
But
was kind of a swamp.
it was not really much of anything.
Yeah.
But but they officially said, okay, it's closer to the center of the state, and we want to get that kind of center point there. And I imagine it's like all political things. There are probably some different stuff involved. So yeah, that's why they eventually set up Indianapolis down there. But so yeah, it is interesting to see how that flows there.
Well, David, thank you so much for sharing with us. This was a lot of fun. This video will be on Facebook Live for a month, and now Facebook will but then it'll be on YouTube, and then we'll put it back on Facebook. I'll get you a copy of it as well if you want to use it for anything. But thank you so much, and I definitely want to reach out to you again and start planning for upcoming talks too.
Right. Well, I'm at the Crossroads Discovery Center up at the Hamilton East Public Library. We have a lot of those resources that I talked about. So anybody who wants to do this kind of research, when you want to talk to me or any of my coworkers who know just as much as I do, by all means, please come on up. We'd be glad to see you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Bye bye.